If a man has an apartment stacked to the ceiling with newspapers, we call him crazy. If a woman has a house full of cats, we call her nuts. But when people pathologically hoard so much cash that they impoverish the entire nation, we put them on the cover of Fortune magazine and pretend that they're role models. Welcome to Calm in the Chaos, where greed is a topic for all of us to unpack today. What I read at the beginning was a post from Facebook, and it hit me hard. Greed is one of the 7 deadly sins or cardinal sins, right up there with pride, wrath, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth, just in case you need a reminder. Greed can be defined as intense and selfish desire for something, especially wealth, power, or food. I find the wealth and power greed often go hand in hand. As I began working on this God Talk, I asked myself, have I ever been greedy, wanting more than my fair share? And yes, there have been times in my life when I was younger that I thought money and the acquisition of a lot of money would lead to a rich and fulfilled life. That fell away as my spiritual practice and the riches of good health, longevity of family members, and deep experiences of miracles in my life became more valuable. Greed. Even the word sounds harsh. I picture a Scrooge-like person counting their money every evening, someone who will make money, take money, or borrow money without regard for others, not thinking about the cost to human life and suffering, and not caring about the inequity in resources available to all in our communities. That's what greed is. Dr. Linda Shaw, in her TED Talk on greed, mentioned that greed stops us thinking clearly. Greed stops us caring about one another. And even worse, it distorts our personality and it distorts our emotions. I don't believe greed is hoarding material possessions as someone does who lives with a mental disorder or is coping with obsessive compulsive behavior. No, those are not greed. That's illness, and the people who are grappling with it need our compassion and understanding. Greed is wanting more than your share with disregard for others' needs or feelings. We notice the seeds of greed in a young child when, unsupervised, she may eat all the donuts in the box. We feel greed in adults whose bottom line is always profit, with less concern for employees' well-being. Greed can be disguised as a sale. When a business rides on the back of a holiday, a holy day, if you will, to make more profit, to grab our attention, to consume more, buy more, spend more, it's greed. Rather that they might ask us loyal customers to celebrate the true meaning of a holiday and offer the sale only on the day before or after the holiday. We're advised many times in the Bible to not succumb to greed. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, we hear these words: "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal." This text reminds us that everything material, houses, shoes, tools, books, furniture, boats, stores, monuments, temples, churches, bridges, cathedrals, everything can be damaged, stolen, or completely destroyed. Investing our lives in things will only bring disappointment and heartache. I think of the sentimental value we put on objects that belonged to someone either famous or related to us, or both. Museums are filled with artifacts that belonged to other cultures and world leaders. The objects are there to teach us about history and for us to connect with people of other times and places. The actual objects are the secondary value. The learning is the first. A friend of mine recently visited the Holy Lands and presented a beautiful slideshow of her photos one day on a screen in the front of the church. As I watched, I was reminded that the tree, the walkway, the stone, the room, the material things that were pictured were not the valuable pieces of her story. The fact that Jesus had sat under that tree, had walked on that path, had touched that stone, and had been in that room, those were the valuable pieces of the story. A quote from Steve Jobs, who died from pancreatic cancer, a billionaire at age 56. He was the co-founder and CEO of Apple Computers. He wrote this knowing he was dying. I reached the pinnacle of success in the business world. In others' eyes, my life is an epitome of success. However, aside from work, I have little joy. In the end, wealth is only a fact of life that I'm accustomed to. At this moment, lying on the sickbed and recalling my whole life, I realize that all the recognition and wealth that I took so much pride in have paled and become meaningless in the face of impending death. Our Buddhist neighbors teach us that materialism is a short-lived path to happiness because there's always another list of things that we want. I cringe a little bit when I hear adults asking children what they want for a birthday or a holiday gift. What do you want for Christmas this year, honey? That sort of thing. Better to ask them what they're giving at holiday or give them an experience instead of a thing. Spend time with them. A ticket to a show, a day at the zoo, something that isn't a thing. We might want to examine our language surrounding gifts to make sure we're not promoting greed. Hear these words from the book of Luke, chapter 12, verses 15 through 21. It's a story that Jesus told people about their spiritual lives. I read it from the translation called The Message. Speaking to the people, he went on, "Take care, protect yourself against the least bit of greed. Life is not defined by what you have, even when you have a lot." Then he told them this story. The farm of a certain rich man produced a terrific crop. He talked to himself, "What can I do? My barn isn't big enough for all of this crop." Then he said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barn and build a bigger barn. Then I'll gather in all my grain and goods and I'll say to myself, 'Self, you've done well. You've got it made and you can now retire. Take it easy and have the time of your life.'" Just then, God showed up and said, "Fool, tonight you will die. And your barn full of goods, who gets it?" That's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God. So why did this topic of greed pop up this week? Well, the reason is similar to how many God Talks have been born. People, events, and ideas are placed before me, and I can choose to notice or to ignore. And this week I noticed, I read, I remembered, I pondered, and the common element was greed, or lack of it. Greed is all around us in a world where, if the resources were evenly distributed, I do believe more people could live without want and worry. I'm not sure how we arrived at this imbalance of paying people who influence and care for our children and our elderly so little in comparison to what we pay some of our professional athletes, actors, and pop musicians. Perhaps our own moral compass of where we should prioritize our money is out of balance. On Wednesday, Simone Biles, an Olympic athlete, withdrew herself from the gymnastics competition at the Tokyo Olympic Games. She addressed the stress and toll that the pandemic year has taken on mental health. She recognized that her own health was more valuable than greedily garnering another medal around her neck. We must believe her and support her in the strength it took to do what she did, with the whole world watching, some of whom have judged her harshly. Using one's extreme wealth for good is the opposite of greed. In those same Olympic Games, the Norwegian women's beach handball team was fined heavily for breaking uniform rules, choosing to wear more modest clothing than the skimpy bikini pants assigned to them. The American pop singer Pink offered to pay their fines for each of those athletes. Many well-paid actors, musicians, and athletes have begun charitable organizations to help children, women, and homeless people. Warwick Dunn, an unsung hero who played for the NFL for 12 seasons, used his money to provide support for single parents so they don't have to work 2 jobs. His own mother was killed by an armed robber while she was working her 2nd job. Singer Dolly Parton donated $1 million to the Vanderbilt Institute for Research on the Moderna COVID vaccine. She began the Imagination Library for children to overcome illiteracy. The organization has sent over 100 million books to young children in all 50 states, in Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom. These people understand that they've been blessed with material wealth, and they understand that greed can become intoxicating, but they've taken charge of their emotions and distributed some of their fortune to better the world. This is the antithesis of greed. This is building up riches in heaven while you're building them up on earth. This is following the guidelines of Jesus' lessons. Lust for wealth erodes our very souls, as that desire, that drive to amass money may be an attempt to fill an emotional need. Spiritual maturity leads us to understand we must face our emotional needs, evaluate them, and fulfill them in healthy ways. Don't misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with having a lot of money. It's what we do with it that matters. And if we feel the need to strive for more and more material wealth, we must ask ourselves a question of whether or not it's a healthy way to live. This week, a CNBC report was titled, "Jeff Bezos Says Sales of Blue Origin Space Tourist Flights Are Approaching $100 million Already." He's the founder of Amazon.com and may be the wealthiest man on the planet. His company, Blue Origin, is taking people into space, but at an incredible cost. There has been speculation this week about what could be done for humanity and the planet with the money that's being spent on taking billionaires into space. How do each of us know when we have enough and when it's time to share the excess? Where do you and I draw that line? How much do we trust that all will be well as children of God? Let's attempt to forge a trust so deep that we don't need to amass fortunes beyond what we will ever need in our lifetimes, or if we are blessed with more than we need. Our first and only inclination is to share. However you relate to the one source of all the love that's in this world, whatever you believe God to be, let's pray. Spirit of protection, we come today in gratitude, grateful for the intangibles in our lives: health, friendship, beauty, truth, honor. Protect us from believing that goods and money are the key to our happiness. We truly see that all of life is a gift, Hear our words as we each whisper our thanks. Spirit of joy, we strive to recognize the joy in small miracles, in relationships, in tiny gestures, in one kind word. We ask you to continually show us ways to project the joy to others. Spirit of contentment, we want to satisfy our longing for happiness with building deeper relationships with you. Help us to recognize our own greed and to replace it with serving you and serving others. We know greed appears in many forms. When it shows up in the need for attention, notoriety, and fame, when our egos get out of balance, we ask that you help us to recognize that and correct it. We come today with concerns on our hearts. Hear us as we whisper them to you now. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So be it. Amen. A little footnote here. We are an interfaith center and we use bits and pieces of spiritual practices from several traditions. I sometimes end our prayer with Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. It's an invocation of peace. Our Buddhist and Hindu neighbors use the Sanskrit word Shanti 3 times to represent peace in body, peace in speech, and peace in mind. Our musical selection today is right here. It's a song in Hebrew. You may want to meditate on the words as you listen.